Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is another edition of Canada's most irreverent talk show, the Andrew Lawton Show, here on True North, Wednesday, October 5th, just after 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If you are watching this live, if you're catching it on a pre-record, it is whatever time your clock says. So I don't want to overcomplicate things for you too much. We have a busy 6 weeks ahead of us, starting in just, I think, like 10 days or so. We've got the hearings into the Emergencies Act Commission, the commission that's been set up to investigate the government's use of the Emergencies Act, the Public Order Emergency Commission. And those hearings are going to be very, I think, revealing for a lot of reasons. And what's happening now is a former Justice, Paul Rouleau, has been appointed, and they're going to be hearing testimony from government officials, from law enforcement officials, from people who were connected to, in very integral ways, the convoy itself, people like Tamara Leach and Tom Marazzo. And I think there's going to be a lot that we learn, maybe not every day, but I think probably close to every day of this commission. And I wanted to tell you right up front, True North is going to be covering this extensively. I'm going to be in Ottawa at some point. My colleague Ellie Kenton-Nantel and Rupa Subramanya, they'll be in Ottawa as well. We'll also be covering the hearings live. They're going to be broadcast for anyone in the country to watch. But I want to take a bigger picture look, as well as a little look at the granular level here of what this is actually, how this is going to unfold, and talk about the significance of it. Because early on, it really seemed like Justin Trudeau was just trying to check a box here. He didn't want any sort of scrutiny. He wanted to investigate the protesters themselves and not his own government's declaration of this so-called emergency. So we're going to do things a little bit differently on this program from how we usually do it. I want to get right to the guest, and we have a fan favorite for you today, Keith Wilson, who is a tremendous lawyer in Canada. And I've so instinctively been used to calling him Keith Wilson, Queen's Counsel, that when I realized he was a KC today and not a QC, I was a bit confused. And as Keith pointed out off air, now the Queen's Counsel that we've all had are King's Counsel. So Keith Wilson, KC, who is the lawyer representing a number of the convoy protesters and organizers as they appear before the commission in just under 2 weeks' time here. Keith, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me on. Good to see you, Andrew.
So let's start with the actual purpose of this itself. At the end of this, are we going to have a very distinct binary ruling that Justin Trudeau was right or wrong to invoke the Emergencies Act? Or is the report that we're going to get out of this going to be far more nuanced than that?
Well, only time will tell, of course. But I mean, why is this inquiry even happening? And it's happening because under the predecessor legislation, the War Measures Act, there's a number of check and balances. But when the government commission reviewed the War Measures Act and proposed its modernization in the form of the Emergencies Act, they added an additional layer of check and balance. And that additional layer was a mandatory requirement that the Privy Council appoint a judge. In this case, it's Mr. Justice Rouleau actually is still a sitting justice of the Ontario Court of Appeal. He's not retired. He's obviously on leave from that to handle this commission. But the important thing is that the lawmakers of the day felt there needed to be additional protections to Canadians who would have their rights violated by the invocation of these extraordinary powers. So what the law says, the Emergency Act says, is that there must be a public inquiry held by a commissioner into the circumstances that led to the invocation, and that the commissioner must prepare a report and lay it before not just the House of Commons and the Senate in Ottawa, but also the parliaments of every capital and every province, with respect to the commissioner's findings on whether or not the invocation was justified.
When we look at the scope of this inquiry, early on, Justin Trudeau really tried to be framing this as though this was an inquiry into Tamara Lich, and this was an inquiry into Tom Marazzo, and an inquiry into this. And it didn't seem like that was, as you've just noted, supported by the legislation. And I'm very pleased to see that there does seem to be a broad array of witnesses that have appeared on that preliminary list that are going to be called. So are you optimistic that this will be a truly robust inquiry that will investigate the government itself?
Well, myself and the legal team that's heading to Ottawa next week for our deployment, we're calling it, because, normally you go away for a week or two on a long case, not 7 weeks this is going to require. But, we're both optimistic and pessimistic, but that's a role of a lawyer. We've got to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So we're ready for both scenarios. We're entering into this in good faith, that it's a bona fide process and that it's not going to be merely a whitewash. But, it's going to be an opportunity while we're there and our clients are there. Those Canadians who came forward to fight for the freedoms of their neighbors, to tell their story. And the one place that they'll be hopefully telling their story, if they're all allowed to be witnesses, because that remains to be seen, is in the hearing room. But we're also intending to make those that are allowed to speak widely available to you and others outside of the hearing room, to make sure that the truth gets out. Because we believe that anybody who examines this truthfully, and not through the lens of the captured legacy media, but people who saw the live streams, people who followed the new emerging media, they know what happened. They know that this was a peaceful gathering of Canadians of all backgrounds, of all ethnicities, of many languages, that were there because they were fundamentally concerned about the Prime Minister and the government's overreach into our lives and the impact it was having on our jobs and our children and our communities. So, and that they were there as representatives of many thousands of other Canadians, each one of them taking a stand for the Charter and the rule of law.
One thing that I find fascinating, and you sort of alluded to it there, and you and I have talked about it on this very program in the past, is that the level of control that's been exacted through the bail conditions on Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, notably. I think the line you used is that it would make Putin envious, in that these people have been barred from, in Tamara's case, using social media, in both Tamara's and Chris's case, talking to media or speaking in any way about the convoy. For Canadians who saw them be arrested in February, this has been 8 months later, the first opportunity they will have had, if they're testifying, to actually speak out, to speak about what's happened to them. And that's quite significant. And I'm glad they're being given, it seems like, that opportunity. But it's so significant to me that 10 months has gone by in which both of these people have had a gag order. And it's only under this scenario that they're going to be allowed to speak.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's really hard to believe that in Canada, a citizen who is otherwise completely law-abiding and has an impeccable history and record of contribution to communities, Habitat for Humanity, helping her neighbors, worked as a 911 dispatcher, or grandma, would find herself that the Prime Minister and the government feels so threatened by her words and what she can say, that they put her under an incredible gag order that prevents her from speaking publicly, criticizing COVID-19 mandates and government policies, and speaking in support of the Freedom Convoy. And if she does those things directly, indirectly, it's like the language is incredible. It's so broad, directly, indirectly, financially, or otherwise, then she goes back to jail. And she's already spent 49 days in jail, which the three of the judges that reviewed the case said, even if she were convicted of these mischief charges, she would not spend any more time in jail than she's already spent. So it's a real question as to why she's still under any conditions and these charges even stand. But yes, this will be an opportunity for Tamara Lich and Chris Barber to speak to Canadians and to the commissioner and tell their story without fear that suddenly Tamara is going to find herself yet again in shackles and chains.
When we look at this investigation, this commission that's going to undertake its investigation, one thing that really strikes me is that a lot of Canadians were being presented with the facts through the lens of the mainstream media, or near the end through the government's filter. When Justin Trudeau and Marco Mendicino and Chrystia Freeland were getting up there and telling Canadians what was happening, which certainly, as I've seen writing about this after the fact, was not the case. I have to ask whether, because we don't have a lot of precedent for the Emergencies Act, can the government fall back on things that might have happened or things they thought were happening? Or is there a very high threshold they need to clear to justify this as far as the actual facts on the ground?
Well, so when they invoked the Emergencies Act on February 13th or 14th, rather, they took the position that they met the criteria for the invocation, which meant that, the enemy was not necessarily at the gate, but the enemy was within the country and the government was on the verge of collapsing and being toppled, right?
Yeah,
Like,
the bouncy
that's
castles
really the
were
test.
very, very
That's
raucous.
really the test. And so they've got a tough road to get down here. We're not expecting this to be a clean process, in the sense that we've seen how Minister Mendicino in particular has had to walk back a number of statements that he's made that have been proven to be contradicted by the testimony of the police chiefs. Like when he said, the police asked for it, and they went to police chief number one. No, we didn't. OPP, no, it wasn't us. RCMP, no, we didn't. And on I could go, the fires, the arson, the rapes, all of these outrageous statements that he's made. So we're anticipating that's going to continue. And we are ensuring that we have extensive rebuttal evidence ready to expose the truth and to hold all of the witnesses to a high standard of telling the truth and exposing the truth. So it remains to be seen how they're going to exactly conduct themselves, but we're just assuming that Mendicino in particular is going to just continue his past pattern of behavior.
Now, as I understand it, this isn't adversarial in nature. So from a format perspective, you can't directly cross-examine witnesses, can you?
No, you can.
You can. So when are you going to get to go up against Justin Trudeau then? Because we know he's being called.
Well, the nature of this process is inquisitorial. And so it's not like a normal case I would have where I'm representing one party and they think they're owed $1 million by another party and the judge has to rule on that, or someone's being defended against a criminal charge and they risk going to jail. It's a fact-finding process. And so one of the difficulties that's arisen and the unique things about this case is the pivotal role that myself and my colleague lawyer Eva Chipiuk played in being on the ground and dealing with the negotiations with the police and the liaison with the police, dealing with the negotiations and the mayor on the deal to move the trucks out of the downtown, but for Wellington. And all of these events that are now very critical to whether or not the invocation was justified. So my clients have instructed me to make myself available to be a witness, which is very unusual. It's not without precedent. So there's a general rule that if you can't be both, you can't be both the barrister doing the cross-examinations as well as a witness. So we've expanded our legal team and to address that scenario. And so if I am testifying, I will not be conducting the cross-examinations. If I'm not testifying, I will be conducting the cross-examinations. So that's the current lay of the land. I'll still be heavily involved in advising on the case, obviously, and preparing the witnesses and identifying and assessing the testimony from the government officials and the police. It will be quick. Normally, you have to turn to your client when someone testifies opposite, and you got to say, "Is that right? Is that true? Did that really happen?" I'm going to be sitting there going, "No, that didn't happen. No, that's not right." So it's going to really speed us up. We're going to be able to respond and assess in, instead of seconds, nanoseconds.
But just to confirm, because we do know that the Prime Minister's office has said that Justin Trudeau is expected to testify. So he will not just face questions, I'm understanding from what you're saying, from the commissioner, but also conceivably from you or one of your colleagues representing people connected to the convoy.
That is the normal process. That when a party has full standing, they have the right to do an opening statement. They have the right to address procedural matters. They have the right to present witnesses and examine them in chief. They have the right to cross-examine witnesses adverse in interest and then do closing arguments. So we've received no indication that there's going to be a deviation from that. I can't speak to the witness list because it's confidential. I haven't disclosed who's on it, but I have read the same news stories that you have read. So I do know that it's in the public domain that the Prime Minister's office has confirmed that he will be attending as a witness. I think it's very important that he be there. He has got a lot of explaining to do. I mean, remember this, that the border at that Coutts and Windsor were open. There was no border closures on the they opened up on the Saturday and the Sunday. So that would be the 12th and the 13th of February. And then we secured the agreement after a number of days of negotiations with the mayor on behalf of the truckers to leave the downtown, to consolidate the trucks up onto Wellington and the Sir John A, with the balance of the trucks and the protest vehicles going out to Armprar and another base camp called 88 outside of the city. There was shuttle bus service already running. The mayor's vision was that the shuttle buses could be expanded, and then the protesters could come and go during the day and bring their signs and their flags and so on, and help bring some normalcy back to the downtown core. And the truckers agreed to that. And we were on the process. We'd announced the deal on the Sunday. We signed it on the Saturday. And then on the Monday morning, we started Sunday night. There was a logistics meeting at City Hall with the superintendent of police, the city manager, the head of emergency services, and a delegation of logistics specialists. And my colleague Eva Chipiuk attended that meeting as well. Plans were put in place for the morning move. And the next day, the Monday, same day, just prior to him announcing, the Prime Minister announcing the invocation of the Emergencies Act, there was 102 protest vehicles moved from the downtown, 42 trucks in total, 23 went up to Wellington, the rest left and went to these other locations or home, and 2 city blocks were cleared. So if you think about it, had the government not intervened and stopped that deal from being completed, the whole downtown would have been cleared, but for Wellington by Wednesday. And it turns out it wasn't until Friday that they sent in the goons, the riot police, to beat up Canadians and veterans. And then it wasn't till the Sunday that they actually cleared everything out. So had the Prime Minister...
It's important to note, Wellington Street, not a residential street, not a business street. It is a government street. So it would have been, as far as protests are concerned, focused squarely on the government if it were confined to Wellington Street.
Well, and that was the mayor's message. He was, when we were having the negotiations leading up to the Saturday deal, was he said, I understand why the protests are here. Your grievance is with the federal government. So consolidate, there's lots of space up on Wellington still. Move your trucks up onto Wellington and your protest vehicles there. And part of the Sir John A. But otherwise open up and remove, well, the streets were open, but remove your presence from all other streets. And that's what the truckers agreed to. Interestingly, I was just in Ottawa 2 weeks ago to argue the mootness, defend the mootness application for Premier Peckford's case. And so went for a little walk. Wellington Street's still blocked by barricades, big concrete barricades. So, would it have made a difference functionally to the city had Wellington been blocked for another month or two because there were still trucks there? Obviously not, because it's blocked by the government right now. But symbolically, I think the idea of the mayor resolving this situation that was being watched internationally, as you know, in the face of the Prime Minister flatly refusing to have any discussions with the truckers about their concerns, despite the Prime Minister meeting with BLM and other protest groups regularly, would have exposed him for who he is and made him look very weak. And I think that's why he kiboshed the deal and sent in the police.
Yeah, and I also believe, and one thing that I'm going to be listening for and watching for in the hearings, that they were hell bent on wanting the financial powers of the Emergencies Act, which were really, as we saw from Windsor and Coots, the one thing that they couldn't do without the Emergencies Act, really, as far as normal policing powers, it seemed. And I don't want you, Keith, to have to give away anything. Not that you would. You're a better lawyer than that. But what, in general, are the questions that you still have? The questions that are unanswered as far as things that you think the government needs to really account for?
One, what made you think you were going to get away with this? That's it.
That is a very good question, and one that we will be watching out for in the weeks ahead here. Keith Wilson, what in particular? I mean, who are you? What part are you most looking forward to? I know it's a bit of a marathon, but what are you looking forward to about this set of hearings?
Them being over and getting back home to my family and my dog.
All right.
But
well,
no,
that is. I just before we started, I got to see your dog, so I know
yeah,
he'll be
he's a
missing
great
you
dog.
a great deal when you're in Ottawa. But I know you're going to be great.
That's a very sincere answer, but that's you can appreciate that, and I know your viewers will too. But I think I am looking forward to these very important witnesses from all sides coming forward and illuminating their role in this. This is historic. The outcome of this potentially redefines what Canada's about in terms of, I've always thought it was true north, strong, and free, and respect for diversity and inclusion and respect for human rights and freedoms. That's sort of what we've kind of wore as our badge of honor. And so this is going to be an interesting test to see how many other government officials and key police officials and other leaders believe those things to be true.
Yeah, and this isn't a press conference, so my hope is that they cannot hide behind their talking points and sound bites, which is particularly acute in the case of Marco Mendicino, but in general with Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau. That's my sincere hope about this. I literally wrote a book about this thing, and I'm still learning about so much of it as the weeks go on. So I'm looking forward.
But let me say this on that point, just to forewarn. So it's going to be live streamed.
Yes.
But to forewarn everybody, because I've been doing litigation for a few decades now, is there's going to be times where it's going to be really frustrating, because you're right, it's not a press conference. So the witness is going to be allowed to speak for an extended period of time, and they're going to be asked softball questions by their lawyer, and it's all going to be carefully prepared. So you're going to see a narrative get painted, and you're going to, if you know the truth, you'll be getting frustrated, and then you'll be getting anxious. And as it gets worse and longer, more. And so there'll be a lot of that. This is going to be a roller coaster ride for anybody who's been following this very closely. But, we've got a great legal team. We've got some great Canadians who came forward to volunteer. They're going to get on the stand and they're going to tell the truth. And we're going to see what happens here. Just one other thing. A lot of people have asked, is there some way that the Prime Minister could call a snap election or do something to stop this hearing from going ahead? The short answer is no. This hearing will go ahead. It's required by statute. The commissioner needs time to carefully listen to the witnesses and then to review all the documentary evidence and then write his report. So it's going to be a very interesting 2 months coming ahead.
Well, with you as the counsel here, the truth is in good hands. Keith Wilson, KC now, KC, not QC. Appreciate very much your time as always, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, that was Keith Wilson, lawyer representing folks connected with the convoy, the Freedom Convoy protest before the Public Order Emergency Commission's hearings, which start later this month and run into November for 6-7 weeks. We'll be watching them, and True North will have a daily recap. We know that not everyone has the patience to suffer through what Keith just described there and watch hours and hours of this every day. I'm going to be up in Ottawa. My colleagues are going to be up in Ottawa, and we're going to have you covered on this. And we'll also be sharing, as we're able to, clips and things like that on the program. I haven't seen the rules yet as far as if it's like courtrooms where you can't record, but as I understand it, it's going to be very publicly available. And as I said also, this is not going to be an opportunity where Justin Trudeau can hide behind the talking point, where Marco Mendicino can hide behind the talking point. they may, and I'm glad Keith gave that warning, be a little bit, they're able to sort of run their mouth when they're in the softball phase, but these people are going to be subjected to cross-examination. And I'm glad Keith corrected that, because it is inquisitorial and not adversarial. So I wasn't actually sure that cross-examination would be a key part of this. I'm glad to know it will be. And that people who by their nature are not used to taking questions will have to take questions. So that's a bit of a look ahead at what we can expect. And True North is going to be starting with this, obviously some coverage this weekend. But I want to just pull up the exact dates here, because this was pushed back. This was supposed to start in September, as many of you know, but obviously we had to bump it back because there was a health issue that the commissioner had, which was not disclosed, but we hope, and it sounds like has been resolved. So the commission is going to be starting its work on this, and it's going to be taking place in the Bambrick Room at 395 Wellington Street. So ironically, on Wellington Street, and it starts next Thursday, so just over a week, on October 13th, and runs for 6-7 weeks into the end of November. So those are the details, starting with True North at October 13th. You'll be able to see it, and hopefully there will be lots of other coverage as well. So if you value the work we're doing, including covering this and also covering the convoy itself, which was such a watershed moment for independent media, please do head on over to donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news, and we thank you very much for your support. And if you are really interested in this story, I also have a book out on it, which you can buy, The Freedom Convoy, the inside story of 3 weeks that shook the world. I have not actually been called to testify as a witness, but maybe I should just send a signed copy to the commission to enter in as evidence. Who knows? That does it for me for today. We will be back with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show soon enough. This is the Andrew Lawton Show on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.